Welcome back, watching the Press Club. Also making the news this week on the regional scene, the Jamaica opposition won general elections. According to the Star headline on page 21, Jamaica's opposition wins general election as voters tire of austerity. The JLP, the Jamaica Labour Party, winning the election, 33 of the 63 seats. The
33-30.
The PNP, 30 seats. Portia Simpson Miller having to go. According to this article, I'll quote here, Holness, the new Prime Minister, 43 years old, has promised to create 250,000 jobs in the island of 2.7 million people. He's also made a number of other promises, but the article talks about Simpson Miller and her achievements, that she, as the head of state, the inflation hit a 48-year low during her tenure. Falling oil prices freed up government funds in the import-dependent country, and the island's GDP grew 1.3% last year, according to the World Bank. And yet still, with all those achievements under her belt, she still got voted out because people were just frustrated with austerity. Looking at our local situation, I'm mindful of the statistics that the Prime Minister issues in terms of economic growth and that sort of thing. And as a concern of mine that you touched on earlier, that perhaps the Prime Minister, the government, and perhaps the media to an extent do not spend enough time explaining to the population what that really means. Because while you're talking about 14% growth or 1.3% growth, you know, the ordinary
what does it mean to the ordinary person?
Cannot rationalize what that means, how it impacts me, because I am not feeling any difference, you know, in my environment, in my situation, in my struggle, you know, to survive on a daily basis, you know. So, and I think that's the situation that Jamaica is faced with now. And I also recall former head of the central bank during a speech here cautioning regional politicians about making these kinds of promises. 250,000 jobs, you know, talking about ridding the country of its economic woes. We've touched on this before. 5 years is a short space of time in a political career. Looking at the enormity of the situation facing Jamaica or any regional government now, it's going to be a mammoth task for anybody coming in now to clean up, you know, or to build on, in this case, some of the successes of the previous government. Yeah. Now we're talking about the role of the media. What role do we play now in elucidating, in educating, informing, and correcting some of the misconceptions that people have about, you know, these figures, GDP? What is GDP? What is 1.3% growth? You know, how is that impacting me?
Well, you see, the sound bites, we're into the age of soundbite politics. It has always been there. Promises have always been there, but I think the role of the media, I was looking at my favorite weekly review, the Listening Post, this morning, and they were making the point that for only the second time in the history of Israel, the Prime Minister has ensured that he is a Minister of Communications and Information, because politicians around the world have all come to recognize the role of the press, not only in elections but in the society. And at the United Nations, remember, we had this sound bite, this catchphrase, 1.5 to stay alive. Right. Well, apparently Jamaica and Mr. Holness and the JMP learned something from the popularity of that phrase, because in the last 4 days before the election, they came out with a catchphrase, they unfurled an economic program, saying what they will be doing, because the two parties were comparing each other, but each, as always happens, were waiting for the manifestos to comment. And therefore, in the last phases, the big surprise that the JLP came out with was something called 1.5. And it was meant to say that anybody who is earning up to 1.5 million US per year, Jamaican dollars per year, would not be paying income tax. Now, 1.5 million Jamaican dollars, it's 100 Jamaican dollars to the US, so you take out 2 zeros. And that got to a lot of people. They're saying, listen, things bad. If I can get to save tax on $1.5 million and not pay tax, then that's a good catch. And that caught people. But what the economists are already saying is at what cost, because Jamaica
Precisely.
is in the middle of an IMF austerity. Next year, irrespective of whether the government had changed or not, they have to sign to extend the IMF agreement to create 250,000 jobs in 5 years. In the current circumstances would be 50,000 jobs per year, and every year you don't create that, it adds up to the other.
Precisely.
I don't think Jamaicans, I will not say Jamaicans don't know what austerity and what the IMF conditions are, because they've had to deal with that from
For a while,
1976 come all the way up now. So that Jamaica has its own situation to deal with, and Jamaicans have reacted on the basis of the economic situation facing them at home. And that is where I'm saying that our role in St. Lucia has to be not just for elections, but like you say, explain to people what will 1.3% growth mean to and for the lady selling by the market or by the roadside, or to the student, or to the housewife, or to the, you know, what it's going to mean to people. But that, quite apart from upping our ante year round, when it comes to approaching elections, we have to try to keep the discussion at the level that you recommended earlier, which is that try to get people to understand the issues, because again, we are among those people who will have to vote in the election. We are among the voters who will have to consider the issues affecting us. And if we are not careful, what we have already started to see is that we are ending up dealing with issues that are not attached, which are detached from our day-to-day reality. Jufali, passports, CIP, etc. Many of these things, again, what does that mean to the average person who is not interested in anything happening beyond our shores? We need to get them to understand these things, but we also need to be able to, like I said, Jamaicans have looked at the two parties and their economic programs and felt that they'll make a change, because 5 years under Portia Simpson has not delivered what she promised and what the PNP promised. Of course, she'll claim and say, as she does, and as we know, it was not her fault that the price of oil went down, etc., etc. But you don't give excuses for not doing. You know, you've got to find other ways to do what you said you would. In the case of St. Lucia, my interest at this point is for us to be able to, as the press, encourage people to compare the parties, compare the candidates, ask questions, request them to state their positions on things. The UWP has started. They've started saying what they're going to do within 100 days. But then the only things they have mentioned so far, or has been reported, have been negatives. Withdraw Jufali's passport, etc., etc. These are issues, yes, but explain the economic situation. We're not yet out of the woods, but we have started to turn the corner. This administration inherited an economy that it did indicate the conditions would get worse before it got better. The IMF is now saying, yes, St. Lucia is turning around. They want to encourage but caution that there are still tasks. How do we translate that to people? How do we get people to see that whereas youth unemployment was at 45%, to reduce it by 10% in 3 months is a stunning achievement in a situation where the International Labour Organization, the IMF, the World Bank, and the Economic Commission for Latin America and the Caribbean are all saying that unemployment is going to get worse in 2016 instead of better. In a situation like that where you're starting 2016, we need to encourage people to see how possible will it be or can it be for growth to be accelerated. Because if we did 1.3%, yes, I can say that we came out of the red into the black. But how has that changed, or has it changed anything for anybody? That is what people would be asking. These are the sort of issues I would like to hear, and I'm sure that young people would like to hear. In Jamaica already, I was reading an article this morning, there was a higher youth turnout in this election than in the last one. And spokespersons for the young people, one of whom wrote a commentary in today's Gleaner, said, listen, the youth participated because they felt good, some of them, about taking selfies with the ink on their finger and sending it around with comments about having participated in democracy. But what the youth in Jamaica are already saying is, we voted you in, but we want to get involved, and we want you to involve us in your planning. But the young person who wrote said, listen, the kind of rights that youth are interested in today are still taboo with Jamaican politicians, because youth want recognition of gay rights. They want LGBTI rights to be respected, and they want discussions on those things. But no Jamaican politician wants to go there, and certainly not the Jamaica Labour Party. The issue of St. Lucia having factored in the Jamaica election was not taken up. The issue of St. Lucia factoring in Mr. Jufali's wife trying to shove her hand deeper down in his pocket has been blown into a national issue, but there was a serious issue that was raised before the election in relating to St. Lucia, and that is that Mr. Holness owns a company in St. Lucia called ADMAC, which is named after his two sons, in which each of his two sons has 25% and he has 50%. And in his will, he has stated that should he die, his 50% of the St. Lucia company would go to his wife. Now, he used that company to purchase a $300,000 US property on which he is constructing his home in a place called Beverly Hills, the Jamaica equivalent of Beverly Hills, California. And the government at the time, the PNP, the ruling party at the time, was calling on him to explain how he used the St. Lucia company, which is his, to purchase land in Jamaica in order to evade taxes in Jamaica. But of course, it was being raised as in the middle of a campaign, and the Jamaica corruption watchdog, official watchdog agency, was being called upon to make him declare his assets before elections. And he said, listen, he's going to declare his assets in March, which would have been after the elections. Now, he is going to be the Prime Minister. Will he still declare his assets? Will he explain how and why he used the ease of access to St. Lucia's concessions to not pay tax in Jamaica? That didn't seem to be of concern to us. But then I'm going to come back here and say, okay, I do not think, as Prime Minister second time around, because he was Prime Minister for 2 months, I do not think that Prime Minister Holness is going to set up an investigation into the allegations made against him by the PNP during the campaign. We come back to St. Lucia. The United Workers' Party is saying that should it win, within 100 days, it is going to appoint an independent 3-person commission to reopen the impacts case. At what cost? You know, this is the same party that questioned the cost of government hiring lawyers in Washington to try to get the U.S. State Department to review and revisit the imposition of sanctions against us. That is a one-cost thing. But I'm sure that would cost less than reopening the entire thing, closing. Is it going to close a chapter? Does that mean that the impacts report, which has already cost so much, is now going to be, you know, put aside? And all those witnesses, what about all those witnesses? You know, so is that just a dry promise? Is it just a response to say, okay, we're going to do something about impacts, we're not running away from it? To suggest that the impacts report has nothing to do with the United Workers' Party is something I don't think anybody is going to take seriously. But like I said, we seem to pick and choose when we want to defend St. Lucia's name. You know, and it's unfortunate that, like I said, when these issues are floated outside of the press, floated into the press by persons with intentions, when it sounds good, we swarm around it like bees, and we help to, in that way, we help to, you know, give added exposure to an issue which we ourselves find is nonsense. But then that's the story of the day. And I think until we come out of that, and we're not going to come out of it until we begin to really discuss these things as issues affecting us as journalists, and know upfront that we will not agree on what should be done, but let's discuss it. I wish I heard the exchange between Rick and Claudius.
I'm sure it's on social media by now.
Pardon?
I'm sure it's on social media by now.
Yeah, well, I've seen references to it, but then again, even the references I've heard to it by media persons has been more about whether Rick needs prayers. you know, the fluff. The references were not addressing the issues.
Substantive issues. We do for a break. Let's take it, and when we come back, we'll wrap up the last segment.
Already?
Yeah.
We need a double segment, man.